Let me ask you a question. What does Lady Gaga, Britney Spears, Elton John, and Lindsay Lohan all have in common? It's not their money, their fame, or their music. In fact, it's that they share the common struggle with an eating disorder. NEDA, the National Eating Disorder Association, took a recent survey in the year 2016 that proved that 20 million women and 10 million men struggle with an eating disorder. One eating disorder that we can recognize and look at specifically is bulimia nervosa. We need to raise concern in the United States of eating disorders, including bulimia, because they are highly dangerous. We can do this by understanding the small details that we may not know, by raising concern of the amount of people that struggle with eating disorders, including bulimia, and by understanding the symptoms and the common solutions that we can find with bulimia. So like I said, we need to raise concern by understanding the small hidden details we may not know about bulimia. Let me tell you this, women aren't the only people who struggle with eating disorders. In fact, according to the website Your Future is Worth Fighting For, and ANAD, the Anorexia Nervosa and Associated Disorders Association, they found that 20% of men struggled with an eating disorder. Elton John, he struggled with bulimia himself, and he couldn't find help for a long time because he didn't recognize that it was a problem. After a while, he realized he couldn't do it on his own, and he had to go find help. Another thing that is very hard to recognize with bulimia is that you're going to see people who are at above weight average or at normal weight. So why do we see this? It's because we have a large intake of food, 6 times the amount of food a normal person would eat. And then you're going to see self-induced vomit and compulsive exercise. People think with bulimia it's just the self-induced vomit. But in fact, there is compulsive exercise. People want to spend all their time in the gym. They don't want to stop working out. They want to go eat, then they want to go to the gym. That's one thing that people don't realize with bulimia, is we always see the magazines on the cover of the skin and bones, but our bodies don't kick in to this high amount of food intake and then self-induced vomit because our body realizes that we have something abnormal going on, and so it kicks in and it balances it out, and so we don't have a significant drop in weight unless we have bulimia for a long period of time. According to ANAD, the Anorexia Nervosa and Associated Disorder Association, eating disorders are one of the most fatal conditions that is in the United States. It even beats suicide because eating disorders can lead to suicide. I think we don't recognize that people with eating disorders, sometimes they don't ever get help. Like Elton John, he didn't realize he needed help. He found help, and some people don't get to find that help, and so it leads to suicide. So that is why it's considered one of the most fatal conditions. Another thing we don't recognize is it's not just, like I said, one serving of food more than your dad. It's 6 times the amount of food. I was sitting next to a lady in my science class, and I was researching bulimia, and she said, you know, my stepmother, she's bulimic. And she said that one night at dinner, one of the first ways we knew that it was bulimia was because we got to the dinner table and she had so much food. And we got to dessert, and we brought out the dessert, and she was dumping salt on her dessert. And she took in the salt, and she couldn't eat the cake anymore. And she couldn't stop eating, so she had to force herself to quit eating by making it so disgusting she couldn't eat it anymore. There's common details and there's small details that people don't understand. Like, you're going to see people who are at their normal weight. You're going to see compulsive exercise, which is not normally one of the first facts we know about bulimia. And that they eat 6 times the amount, and they almost have to force themselves to not eat. This is some common details that we need to know about bulimia. The next way we can raise concern about eating disorders, especially bulimia, is by understanding the amount of people it affects. Let me tell you this. I'm sitting in my math class for an hour a day. And then I look up the fact that every 62 minutes someone dies from an eating disorder. So while I'm in math, someone dies from an eating disorder. And while I'm at practice for 2 hours, 2 other people die. If that doesn't make you take a step back and think about how dangerous this is, how dangerous eating disorders is, I don't know what facts will. Another problem is that 1.5% of American women struggle with an eating disorder. And this is all from that survey we talked about from NEDA, the National Eating Disorder Association. And although 1.5% may not seem like a lot, it's actually 1.8 million women. And in the United States, that's a large amount of people. If all those people in the United States, they didn't have an eating disorder, we could find them help, that's 1.8 million people's lives we can save. Some other common facts, or some facts that NEDA, the National Eating Disorder Association, found was that 2 out of 10 die. So if you have a family that has 10 people in it, just look at your sister and your mother and say, well, they're eventually going to die of an eating disorder. 2 out of 10. And 1 in 10 struggle with substance abuse as well. Like I talked about, Elton John struggled for 16 years with bulimia. And he also struggled with a cocaine addiction before he recognized the problem and said, I need to go get help. Britney Spears struggled with this disorder for 9 years. But she also admitted found on many websites that she would take almost 30 prescription drugs a day and struggled with major addiction with prescription drugs. Lady Gaga, although I did not find any addiction, substance abuse, she admitted to struggling with bulimia since she was a teenager. And Lindsay Lohan also admits that she struggled with bulimia and drug addiction. People don't walk around with signs on their shirts that say, guess what? I'm bulimic. In fact, you could be sitting next to someone who has a family member who has bulimia. Like I said, I was sitting in science the other day, and the lady next to me said, my stepmother struggles with bulimia. And I said, well, tell me more about it. And she said, for a long time, they didn't even recognize it. Like I said, it's hard to recognize. And they said finally they noticed the large intakes of food, they noticed the common symptoms, and they had to approach her about it because she needed help. You could be sitting next to someone and you couldn't even know it, that they struggle with an eating disorder or bulimia. And this is why we need to raise awareness because, like I said, 2 out of 10 people with an eating disorder are going to die. And every 62 minutes, someone passes away from an eating disorder, whether it be from suicide or just because their body is so starved that they can't live. The last reason we need to raise concern, or the last way we can raise concern, is by understanding the common symptoms and ways to help. Some symptoms that we're going to see is, like I said, compulsive exercise. If you notice self-induced vomit, it's going to be hard to recognize because they don't like to flaunt that they have an eating disorder. It's not something that they're proud of. You're going to see tooth decay from the vomiting. You're going to see they're going to have a sore throat, and they're going to have sores on their knuckles. You're going to see bloody vomit. They're always going to be feeling maybe faint, and they're going to live a very secretive life. They don't want people to know that they're having this struggle because they don't know how to help themselves, so why would anyone else know how to help them? But that's the thing is, we may not know how to help them, but because I'm not bulimic and because I don't have an eating disorder, it doesn't mean that it's time for me to go sit back on the couch and relax. This is dangerous. Eating disorders are dangerous, and people die and have a very hard time with eating disorders. So if you know someone that has an eating disorder, help them. Find a way to get them help. And I know there's no special way, there's no medicine that's going to help them, but you recognizing it is one of the biggest steps in finding them help. Like I said, what do Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears, Elton John and Lady Gaga all have in common? They're just like us. They don't have, yes, they have more money than us, and they have a lot of fame, but they are just like everyday Americans who struggle with eating disorders. And the only way we can raise concern for eating disorders, including and specifically bulimia, is by understanding the small details. What is unknown about bulimia that we can learn about so we can recognize it easier? How many people are affected by bulimia? Honestly, knowing that 30 million people struggle with eating disorders, and a lot of those people, and one of those people was the lady who was sitting next to me, it hit home a little bit for me because the story was sad. It was sad to hear about this girl who had a stepmom who couldn't even take care of her because she was so sick. We need to raise concern for the amounts of people that have bulimia. And we can do this by recognizing common symptoms and simple ways to help them.